And I mean, that's sort of what we'll be talking about all month, is that yin and yang, those black and white moments, those categorizing. We as people do in general, we tend to categorize people. Why? Because we want to know what we're going to expect in each situation, but that doesn't mean that you can always expect those things. In fact, I quite enjoy when something unexpected happened. Life would be boring if it weren't. So real quick before let's talk about empathy and what empathy is and how empathy is really very critical in coaching. I mean, if you're a coach, that is definitely, I would say, one of the cornerstones of coaching, without a doubt. Who wants to define empathy?
Well, I think empathy is really just, to put another definition to it, would be being mindful, being aware of not only how you're feeling, but how the person across from you or the people around you are feeling, and to take that with grace. And I think part of it is to move with that understanding, to let it be kind of a guide as to how you express yourself when you are interacting with other people.
I think of empathy more in how I can neutralize myself and hear and accept what someone else
That's interesting.
is saying, where I don't have to put my judgment on them in the process of discovery, I guess you could say.
In my world, like, because for me, I've always thought empathy, the definition of sympathy is that you can see what somebody else is feeling, essentially. For me, empathy has always been that I know what that feeling is like. I understand that feeling because I too have felt that feeling, and so I can empathize with that person and where they are, where they're coming from, their experience. It may not be that I have a complete understanding because everybody's experience is individual, but that I have some personal experience with their life experience or their emotion, and I am able to therefore relate or identify with them as a result of that.
Not so much relate or identify, but be able to have a space of hearing what they're saying. When we get into that identification concept, that's more the sympathy side of things. The sympathy where you, okay, so one of my stories is I had a friend that got murdered many years ago, and I needed to be in a place where everybody else was feeling exactly how I was feeling. That's sympathy, right? Somebody who would have been in empathy is not in that place necessarily in the same emotion that I'm in, but they are able to hear what I'm experiencing and be right there and hold space for me.
It's holding, that's the holding space aspect. And then the holding space and then validation as well. A lot of times comes with that.
Yeah.
And the whole building trust. But now when we speak about empaths, when somebody calls themselves or identifies as an empath, how do you guys define empath? Because just in defining empathy, we got 3 different definitions. So yeah. I'm curious.
I think my definition of empathy was more so along the lines of what an empath is, and kind of how they work within the world. I tend to get empathy and sympathy confused, and they are not to be confused, because again, that sympathy is the expression of your empathy, while empathy is being there, again, like we mentioned, holding space and understanding rather than the reactive part of it, which I think is what defines an empath, is someone who has the ability to react, has the ability to hold that space. Those 2 things I think really define what an empath is.
By the way, hi Letitia Walker and hi Deborah Mack Rankins. Letitia Walker says it's relating empathy. For me, empaths, sometimes being an empath can walk the line of spooky woo-woo, as we call it, right? It's, to my understanding and my belief, if you're an empath, you're somebody who can feel the energy in a room, feel the emotion, feel basically sense to some degree what is going on, and you're capable of feeling. So sometimes empaths will talk about being overwhelmed with emotion, or being a room having a lot of energy where there's a lot of emotion. They cannot think clearly or function in that space because there's so much energetic emotion going on that they have to go and clear their energy and walk out of the room and sort of clear their heads. To my understanding, that is what an empath often is. Lisa?
So I'm going to take it to a different little story that I picked up from another class that I was in, learning myself, a little more sciencey. And they were able to measure, and I don't know what the measurometer is called, but they're able to measure the energetic exchange. So there was a young
neurocardiology, by the way. That's like neurocardi. I love it, because that is why our hearts sync up. That's why when we're sleeping, our heart rates will sync up. It's why there's so many things, that it's because of the energetic field our heart puts out, essentially. And it's amazing. Sorry.
So they were even taking it with an animal. Sorry, the phone.
I think all three of our phones start ringing at the same time.
To a dog. It was the young man's dog, as it is himself. And they were measuring the energy exchange, that heart energy that you're just speaking about, between the animal and the human, and that exchange, and how far apart that force field, I'm going to call it force field, it's not what they call it, but it was about 6 feet away that they could have and measure that energy exchange. Now just think, if we are in a room full of people who are highly charged, even I don't know if you guys remember, I don't know what year it was, probably 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, we had in LA that riot.
Well, I was just going to say, it's more than just energy, though, because what we cannot deny is we as humans, we excrete pheromones. We excrete, stuff that we don't even realize. This is something I know. I've studied fear my entire life. I used to scare people for a living, and then I went to a very scared individual. And because of that, I have a huge fascination with fear, and I've studied fear. And fear is contagious. Why? Because if you get a group of people in a room, one of them is afraid, they will start to excrete a hormone or a pheromone, and that then the next person smells, and on a animalistic level, their fear levels will heighten, and you multiple that, multiple. Everybody starts to react in this fear state, and it's fascinating.
But we take that person who is highly sensitive to outside influences, and that's that empath that can feel and maybe not understand why they're feeling things, or maybe they have educated themselves and they do understand why. The bottom line is you have to understand who you are, what you're doing as a sensitive person, and recognize what's yours and what is not yours.
So, and well, that's not, I want to say, when you say sensitive, I don't mean like sensitive, like not all empaths are weepy crying all the time.
I don't mean sensitive like that.
It's not that kind of sensitive, because I consider myself very empathetic in that regard, but I'm also, like we were talking about earlier, I'm an audio digital, as they say. So I see the world in patterns and rules, and I expect everything to sort of follow a certain pattern. A plus B equals C. This happens, this person will react this way. Of course there are outliers, of course things don't always go as planned. I love that part of it. But because of my ability to detach in just sort of look at things analytically, I often sometimes can appear colder. To those who know me, I'm not cold though at all. I can be cold and abrasive, and but I'm not. Once you get to know me, in fact, I'm a very emotional person. I have the full gamut of emotion. So it's not fair when we use the word sensitive. There's a lot of baggage there. It's sensitive to energy and others. It's not that you're a sensitive, weeping, delicate flower kind of thing.
That's not the sensitivity that I was speaking about. It's a sensitive that you have I'm sensitive
to that word, so that's why